Shana Tova. So it was about a year ago in the Jewish calendar that we gathered together for Rosh HaShanah. And, not much has happened since then, right? It's been quite the year. We made it through the end of our high holidays last year, as I said, just coming to the threshold of Simchat Torah before everything hit the fan, as they say in the colloquial terms. Sorry, just want to make sure. Need to make sure I'm not getting too much of an echo. I'll try to be a little less booming. Yeah, things kind of fell apart pretty fast after we welcomed the new year last year. It looked like 5784 was going to be just one of your run-of-the-mill years, and, the usual things that might come up and happen good, happen bad. Nothing really made it obvious that this was going to be a year unlike any we've had in decades. And yet, there it is. Even as we began our Rosh Hashanah this year, there were sirens wailing from ballistic missiles coming in from Iran. And that was in response, of course, in quotes, from Israel striking a blow against Hezbollah, able to take out the Nasrallah, who had been their leader for decades and had been responsible for so much bloodshed in Israel and in Lebanon and in other parts of the world. But of course, that was tied all the way back to Hamas's brutal and murderous attack on October 7th and everything that had happened in between. It has been one of the most difficult years for Israel that she has ever faced since 1948. A year of constant warfare, a year that has seen so many of her young people killed, not only at the initial outset that happened on October 7th, although that was a watershed moment, but the soldiers that continue to fall in pursuit of justice and pursuit of peace, to ruin the ability of Hamas to make war. And then the numbers that often don't get reported, the thousands and thousands who have been injured, that yes, survive their battlefield injuries, but return home, missing limbs, on difficult medical regimes, in many ways never quite the same. And having only begun their life, now the dreams they might have been all reshaped or dashed completely. It has been a horrible year for Medinat Yisrael. But what about for us? Here in America, we don't have missiles flying in from Iran. The Jewish community in the United States, we've had a nice, calm year that has just allowed us to focus on the needs of Israel abroad, right? No, I mean, it sounds ridiculous that we would complain about the situation in America, given the relative situation in Israel. And yet, we do have to note, this hasn't been a great year for us either, as the Jewish community of the United States. There were more than 1,800 reported anti-Semitic incidents to the FBI this last year. That is a 63% increase from the previous year. 63% in 1 year. Now, approximately 25% of citizens of the United States hold overtly anti-Semitic views. That is the highest recorded number in 60 years. You have to go back to when we weren't allowed to live in certain neighborhoods, when we could be denied an application to a job because we were Jews, when Jews were not allowed to enter universities freely because they were Jews. You have to go back to that time period to find as many Americans with anti-Semitic views as there are now in the United States. That really sucks. And it's okay to say that. And it is okay to complain, and it is okay to say this is wrong. And it is okay to say, but it's not going to be like this. That we're going to work incredibly hard as Jews to not just ignore the rising anti-Semitism, to not play it off, but to say this needs to be addressed. Now, we could go back to the 1800s, when anti-Semitism was even worse than what it is here, speaking specifically regarding Europe. And in the 1800s, there were a couple of options. You see, there was at least the hint of a promise, of a maybe, of a condition that was never followed through on, but we didn't know that back then. That maybe if we changed, they wouldn't hate us quite so much. That maybe it was because we were so different. Maybe we were on the wrong side of different issues. Maybe we had not shown ourselves loyal to the zeitgeist of the generation. And if we did, then we could be treated normally. The blessed promise of normalcy. And many Jews tried. They put on the top hat, they wore the tails to shul. Some of them even moved their services to Sundays rather than Shabbat in order to try and fit in. They spoke like good Europeans. They acted like good Europeans. But then there was a problem, because as much as they acted like good Germans or good Frenchmen or good Englishmen, there were people who said, you put on a top hat and tails, you're part of the capitalist bourgeois elite. You are oppressing the workers. You are the greedy moneylenders of Europe. You are the Rothschilds, and you crush the proletariat under your heel. Many other Jews said, well, you know what? The crushed proletariat is actually a real thing, and maybe we should side with them. Maybe we should be part of the worker movements to overthrow the capitalist elite bourgeois system. And of course, once we were found in large numbers among those circles, working on behalf of the common people, trying to promote unions and such, they said, you're part of the communist revolution. You are part of the socialist plot to destroy capitalism and freedom across the globe. You are nefarious fifth columnists who are trying to take us down from within. It is not often that one group of people get to be both the capitalist bourgeois elite and the proletariat revolutionary at the same time. Usually you're disqualified from holding both those jobs simultaneously. But somehow we were able to manage it. And that has continued, not just from Europe, but also into the modern day. If Jews say, well, you know, there are many people who are attacking us for not supporting right-wing agendas solidly enough, so we will tact further to the right and support those policies, then of course those on the left call us nothing but fascists, nothing but shills for militaristic totalitarian ideas. And if we tack further to the left, trying to say, well, maybe we should side with those people, then from the right we are told, you are part of the great replacement. You are trying to bring in the unwashed, the unwelcome, to dilute the blood of our nation. You are undermining the freedoms that we gave you by trying to bring a down around our ears. Okay, so which way do we go? How do we get them to stop hating us? Well, guess what? That's the wrong question. Because like we learned from the 1800s in Europe, when it was the hint of a suspicion that maybe they would be willing to stop hating us if only we conformed to the way they wanted us to be, and it turned out that that didn't matter, that they were still going to hate us coming or going. We have learned since then, hopefully, that changing ourselves in order to make others happy is not a solution. That we cannot chase the elusive brass ring of normalcy, of acceptance, by changing what it is to be me, what it is to be you, what it is to be us. That is a non-starter. That in the process, we will simply lose everything. There was a classic tale told by Rabbi Akiva, who was one of the visionaries behind the Bar Kokhba revolt. Didn't work out so well for him. But as he was in the midst of that struggle, people asked him why he bothered to continue practicing Judaism. Wait until it was safe. Wait until the Romans were no longer a threat. And he, of course, gave them a parable. He said, look, it's like fish in the stream. And someone comes along and says, hey, fish, you better know, but there are nets downstream. There are fishermen downstream. So why don't you come out of the river and then you'll be safe? To which the fish responded, the nets may or may not get some of us, but if we leave the river, then we are all dead flopping on the shore. And indeed, if we leave Judaism behind, if we abandon Judaism, then what are we now? Who are we? Why are we? So that means we dig in our heels. We are a stiff-necked people, and usually that's been an insult in the Bible, but it can sometimes be used to our advantage. Being stubborn gives you a certain amount of strength, resolution. And that means we will never change. We will never adapt to any contemporary situation. The opinions that we had 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, will always remain the opinions that we have now, 100 years hence, 1,000 years hence. Well, no. That doesn't work either. Point of fact, the opinions that we had 100 years ago were radically different than the opinions we had 1,000 years ago. There is not a stable opinion of the Jews that was set in stone when Moshe came down from Har Sinai and has remained unchanged or uninflected. Rosh HaShanah did not look identically to what we are now celebrating 1,000 years ago, and certainly not 2,000 years ago. For one, we're short a few live sacrifices. Two, we're sitting in a synagogue rather than surrounding the Temple of Jerusalem. Three, we have a liturgy that has grown with poems and expressions throughout the ages. And our services would be much poorer if we were to wind back the clock 2,000 years, although you might appreciate that they would be a little shorter, give or take how long you were watching the sacrifices. So we have changed, and we haven't changed. The classic conservative movement position. Do Jews change? Yes and no. It depends. It turns out that there are details in life, that you cannot make categorical statements, but that sometimes we change and sometimes we don't. This is best summed up by one of the earlier mottos of the conservative movement: tradition and change. I don't know if anybody here is old enough to still remember the books that were written with that title and the usage of it, but for me it was a powerful statement. And as I'm a fan of paradoxes, as I mentioned yesterday, it seems like a beautiful paradox when in reality it is a perfect expression of Judaism, not only in the conservative movement, but for the last 2,000, 3,000 years. Tradition and change. That we hold on to the past, we hold on to our ways, we hold on to what makes us us, but we also continue to add, embellish, whether it be the liturgical poems or styles of our services, or whether it be the addition of new ceremonies like Simchat Torah itself, that celebration that we were in the midst of when October 7th happened last year. Simchat Torah is only 1,000 to 1,300 years old, give or take which element you're familiar with. That's pretty new as far as Judaism goes. So we hold on and we add. Well, yes and no. We also change, and that's okay. For example, as some of you may have noticed, if you were just paying attention very carefully, there were women on the bima today. I know it was hard to tell because they had a head covering and a talit on, and so maybe you thought they were men, but trust me, they were women. And we knew they were women when we invited them onto the bima. They were not sneaking up here under false pretenses. Now, did Judaism in the conservative movement say, well, we're going to allow women to participate equally to men in all aspects of religious life because we wanna, because it seems like a nice idea, because we think if we do, we will be accepted by those that are pushing for egalitarianism in other aspects of society? No. Instead, there were people who asked the question in modernity, when we have now a completely reshaped society and economic structure, very important, Can we continue to say that women shouldn't be allowed on the bima? Or does our classical tradition actually allow for this to occur under these circumstances, even if it was not standard under the circumstances of 2,000 years ago? And many people, much wiser and much more patient than I, looked for decades through the texts, argued and discussed, and eventually came to a position, yes and no. If your congregation wishes to have women participate in an egalitarian way, then they absolutely can. And here are the different stages of Jewish thought throughout the last 3,000 years that explain explicitly why this is not prohibited by Judaism. That while it may have not been accepted by some Jews and some periods, it is not antithetical to Judaism. We did not cut a part of Judaism out to make room for women on the bima. Instead, we recognize that certain elements of Judaism, which had either been overlooked or allowed to be dormant due to the circumstances of our ancestors' generations, could be used in order to justify, allow, permit, or indeed deny to those who wish to deny women's rights that women indeed are equal in the eyes of Judaism under circumstances such as these. It turns out that you can have tradition and change. And we have worked hard in the conservative movement to ensure that when we have change, it is not by fiat. It is not just waving a magic wand from New York saying, now it is allowed, but instead doing the hard work of actually finding whether it is allowed, whether there is a yes and a no that is going to allow for a change from the tradition of what we had been doing. But there is a secret that often gets missed by many people who read conservative movement pronouncements, yada da da da, in the Jewish press, which is that as much as the Jewish Committee on Law, the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, that's the official name of the body that will often decide many of the details of these important issues, does not get to order every synagogue to comply. There are still synagogues today in many other parts of the world, a couple in the US, but mostly outside the US, that are conservative synagogues that do not allow women to read from the Torah, to have an aliyah, or to lead services. And they are still part of the conservative movement. What the conservative movement has said is that New York cannot decide for Toronto, or Los Angeles, or Buenos Aires, or Jerusalem, and for every conservative synagogue around the world, but we can inform. We can give you the information necessary so that your local community, with the guidance of the Mara D'Atra of your rabbinic authority, will be able to make a decision of how best to meet the current situation with the tools of Jewish tradition in a way that is harmonious and healthy for your community. Now, us here in Orlando may not like that because that means that we know secretly somewhere else in the world there's somewhere they're doing it differently than us. And as we've all learned from American politics, if you disagree with me, you must be evil or stupid. No, says Judaism. Not in the conservative movement, not classically in Judaism either. We believe that there can be more than one way to do the right thing in more than one community, and that is a strength of our people. And it is something the conservative movement embraces in a way that is not embraced by any other path of Judaism currently that is being practiced. We recognize that we need tradition and change, especially in a year like 5785. As we head into this new year with all of the problems that we are facing in this country as Jews, and on top of all the problems that we face in this country simply as Americans, we need to hold on to that which strengthens us as a congregation, strengthens us as Jews within this community in a way that works for our current situation. And we might need to change a few things. We already made a few changes over this last year as part of our response to the events that have been happening. We have been having more discussions about religious freedom and its importance. We have been having many more discussions about Israel, both her current situation as well as the broader statement of her existence. We have been having many more elements of our service which have reflected these concerns, whether it be the previous few weeks when we celebrated religious freedom, whether it be the addition of Hatikvah to all of our services, and of course the recitation of the names of all of the hostages alongside our prayers for the state of Israel made more explicit than ever. Those are changes, and that's good. But we also keep the elements of our tradition that give us strength so that we continue to reflect and draw on the teachings of Torah, on the teachings of our sages, on the teachings of all those generations before us. We don't turn a hard 90 degrees or 180 or whatever you want to calculate it as and abandon everything else because of the needs of that moment. We add the needs of the moment together with the needs of eternity, and we find a path that works for our community. Tradition and change is not just a motto, and I am always been deeply disappointed that the conservative movement abandoned using that as the centerpiece of our movement. Tradition and change is what Jews do. It is what has allowed us to continue to exist to this time. And we will continue. But we need that place to do it. Tradition and change, like I said, doesn't happen in New York. Oh, they can research and come great promulgations and have wonderful ideas. But ultimately, the rubber has to hit the road, and that happens in a synagogue first. I know it's tempting, as good American Jews, to imagine ourselves as atomized individuals pursuing our own religious goals as individuals who happen to coalesce together in this nebulous mist that we call a synagogue. But that's not the way societies work. It's not the way communities work. We need a place to share that experience of tradition and change. We need a place that will validate what we hold dear and remind us of what is meaningful, and a place that will push us to adapt and change when needed, challenge us. Are you sure that you want to continue doing it that way? Are you sure you want to change what you are proposing to change? And the synagogue is the ultimate place where that happens. This is why we need not just the conservative movement, it's why we need a conservative synagogue, and one like Temple Israel, that is made up of individuals who, whether you knew it explicitly or not before I began this sermon, intuitively understand that you must be part of a community to make sense of yourself as well as the world, that you must be part of a community to be able to have the security of a place of tradition and have from that security the willingness to attempt change when necessary, to not allow yourself to either be frozen in place or worse, retreat into a prison of darkness, nor to allow yourself to be buffeted by the winds of public opinion this way and that, seeking to appease whoever happens to be yelling loudest at any given moment. It is here that we find the connection to our roots. We draw from the wellspring of our people, and we can send out new branches in new directions. This is what a synagogue is for. It's not just a place to pray. It's a place to become. It is a place where you can become even more of you than you could without it. But that only happens if you show up, if you participate, if you engage. I'm not even talking about donations. Yeah, we need those too, of course. But I mean, if you want your synagogue to truly be the place that I am describing, if you wish to find that connection, then you have to come, not just to services, although that would be nice. Remember, tonight, 6 o'clock, we've got a Friday night. It'd be nice to make sure we have a minyan. I know that's going to be tricky. But for Men's Club and Sisterhood, to share the conversations of what's going on in life, to come to an adult education program, to volunteer to help out in the office or the school, to be involved in the warp and woof of the fabric of this place, allows yourself to find your place in that tapestry and to help weave the new strands that we always are going to have. Sometimes that new strand won't go anywhere. Sometimes it won't be the right change. Sometimes it'll turn into something more beautiful than you even expected. We need you. You need us. We need each other. If you learned anything from this last year and all of its challenges, learn that and be part of it. Shana Tova.